Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I am in Paso Robles with owner, winemaker of Fulldraw Vineyard, Connor McMahon. Connor, welcome to Wine Soundtrack, and tell us a little bit about Fulldraw.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the time. So we at Fulldraw Vineyard, my wife and I started this in 2012. I purchased the property. During that time, I was actually the assistant winemaker and vineyard manager for a winery called Booker Vineyard, which happens to be immediately adjacent to us right now.
Oh, that's convenient.
Very convenient. But we strive to farm organically and produce great fruit in the vineyard, because what that translates to is great wine in the winery. It makes our jobs and lives a lot easier when you've got great fruit coming in.
Absolutely. So speaking of that, you said you have your own vineyard. Are you exclusively estate fruit, and how many acres do we have here? What's planted here?
Yeah, so we are actually completely estate. Everything that you taste and bottle is grown and produced by us. So we have 100 acres total, and we've got 45 of those acres planted under vine. We are predominantly planted under Syrah and Grenache, but we also have Mourvèdre, Claret Blanche, Grenache Blanc, Graciano, Cabernet Sauvignon, and we will have Petit Verdot next year.
Wow, okay. And your total case production?
We are only about 1,800 cases, so we want to keep it small, grow organically. We really like to focus on people coming into the winery and learning about us that way.
And so does that mean you're all direct to consumer, or are you in any markets?
We do a little bit of distribution, very little actually. We are probably, let's call it 85% direct to consumer.
Okay, so now we got the basics out of the way. So Connor, I know you grew up in Raleigh, North Carolina in the South. So I'm wondering, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
Oh my goodness. If we're talking relevant to wine, I moved out of North Carolina when I was 5. So my first memory really would be in Iowa. So I grew up in a small town in southeast Iowa called Fairfield, and went from basically being 5 through high school there. And my dad and uncles knew that if you wanted to eat good food, you had to be able to cook in Fairfield, Iowa. You weren't going to the local restaurant to get good food. So we're blessed to have a large family. We're Irish Catholic, so we drink and reproduce, usually in that order. So I've got lots of cousins. It's been a lot of fun, but I just remember gatherings after either church or Sunday dinner with our family and friends, and there was always wine bottles on the table. And as a kid, you didn't really recognize that, but once I was in my later teenage years, my dad would say, "Hey, come try this." And normally I would say, "Yeah, it's fine, whatever." And finally a bottle came across the table. I go, "What is that? I understand now. You're drinking it for the taste." And he goes, "Why else would we be drinking it?" He goes, "We're not 19 drinking
to get drunk and reproduce."
Yeah, exactly. We're not 19 drinking Jack Daniels and Busch Light. And I said, "No, that's true." And that really just fueled a fire that I couldn't put out, and just started reading voraciously about wine. And it's a long story, but really fell in love with it.
Wow. So I'm curious, once you sort of recognized that wine was wine, was there one wine, and maybe it was that wine, that was one of those aha moments? Is there a wine that sticks out to you, whether it was the place, the time, or maybe that specific one that set you on a path or a mentality?
Absolutely. So it was, I was very blessed, but I had actually dropped a steel pipe on my head while I was working. And fortunately for me, even though it was a Sunday, our general practitioner was also my dad's closest friend at the time. And I called him saying, "I'll do yard work, I'll do whatever you need, but I'm guessing I need staples or stitches in my head." And he said, "Meet me at your parents' house." So I got 10 staples on the top of my head. And I said, "Well, what can I do to repay you?" And he said, "Oh, I'm going to go down in your dad's wine cellar and we're going to pick out something fun." And my dad started laughing. And they poured me a glass. It was 1989 Chateau de Beaucastel out of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and that was for sure my aha wine, where I go, I love Grenache. Everything about Grenache, I have to see more. So that was definitely the wine.
A head injury leads to a Grenache love.
And some people say, were you actually coherent enough and awake enough to know the wine? But I absolutely was, and it was fantastic. And
you remember nothing else except Grenache was good.
Exactly. So no, it was definitely the first wine that blew my mind, to the point where I couldn't put down a book. I couldn't get off the internet reading about it. So that's really the wine that got me into it.
So wine was a path that you started to follow at a young age. So obviously you said you've been studying a lot. And I'm curious, you have your own property here. You and your wife make wine. If we come into your home and went into your wine cellar or you probably have a proper wine cellar. What would we find in there? Is it a lot of domestic wines? Is it from particular regions of the world, certain grapes, or is it a big smattering of cool stuff?
I would love to say it's a smattering of cool stuff. Everybody here that works for Becca and I at the winery say I'm stuck in a rut. But I go, it's a pretty nice rut that you'd like to be in. But,
a lot of Grenache.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of Grenache, but we make such, I don't want to say big wines. We do make texturally rich wines, and I'm around those red wines all day, every day. Mm-hmm. So when I get home, my wife and I really like high acid, which you'll even see in our reds because of our limestone soils. So I like things with a lot of acidity. We drink a lot of white Burgundy, so Chardonnay out of France, Champagne. But when we're talking reds, we're pretty much cut 50-50 between domestic and French wines. I have some Italian wines, some Spanish wines, but really outside of California and France, it's hard for me to get out of that. So like my employees Gary and Sarah and Madison say, I am stuck in a rut, but I enjoy my rut and I enjoy hanging out there.
Yeah, no complaints there. No. So is there anything you opened up recently that tasted really good?
Oh man, a lot. So for Grenache, we had a 2001 Clos de Caillou Quartz, which is out of Châteauneuf, predominantly Grenache. We've also had a 2007 Domaine Marcoux, which is Willow their high-end wine, which is one of my favorite wines, because even though it is Grenache and it's made in a region that can create massive wines, they did a nice job of kind of harnessing that tension and bringing in some lighter characteristics, which made the wine beautiful but structured enough to be able to last a long time.
Wow. Two Grenaches. I get you now. So, okay, you love Grenache. You obviously work with other grapes. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the great thing about wine is really there's something for everyone. Everything is so diverse, and even when you want to take a step back from the world and focus on Paso specifically, I think that's one of the cool things about Paso Robles. And I think there's something like 60 varieties planted here in the region, and so you can go to multiple different wineries and never feel like you're stepping on each other. Even my neighbors and myself, we don't make the same wines. We may use the same varieties, but we do different blends, different oak percentages and profiles. And so it's a great region to travel to, especially when you like differing things instead of just getting 90% of one variety. You can go to different wineries and get something different everywhere. And it's a lot of fun.
So no perfect variety, but people are always kind of looking for guidance in that way. So when it comes to wine critics and scores, what's your opinion on that?
Oh, I don't know if I have an opinion. I think that those that are looking for some guidance on what they might like, really what I view a good relationship in that sense with a consumer and with a critic is it brings a little bit more solidification on what you enjoy. So you may see a score, taste the wine and go, I don't understand that and I don't agree. Or you say, holy cow, that's my style. I love that. So you're able to follow that critic and kind of get a little bit of guidance, because wines, you may not have the ability to go visit the winery or visit wine country for that matter. I mean, our country's big, the world's big. So I think that it is a good way to have a starting point on guidance. Right.
So you've talked that you said you like high acid wines when you're at home. You make a little bit bigger style wines here. And I'm curious if you had to, red, white, or rosé?
Drink? Drink? Oh my goodness. It's probably 50-50 red and white. I don't drink much rosé. My wife actually makes our rosé, which I think is fantastic. But it's never something that I'll say, you know what, I want rosé. I'm going to go to the wine fridge and pull that out. We do have some, and there's a lot of wineries here in Paso making great rosé. And I think Becca has made an outstanding one. It's just not something that I'm focused on.
So you're a red and white.
Yes.
Won't pick one. Okay.
Yes.
Still or sparkling if you had to pick?
Oh, still. I mean, I love champagne, don't get me wrong, but Yeah. Again, probably split 50-50.
So you're making like a bigger style wine. You're focusing on a lot of Rhône varieties, which, we know Grenache, Syrah, all these beautiful wines. And then it comes down to food pairing. We talked a little bit about when you were at home, you said growing up, you had to know how to cook. When you're cooking or going out to eat, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you follow rules, or do you have guidelines that you suggest? Or do you not care? I mean, and I know a lot of people, you're kind of shaking your head. I know a lot of people say they don't have guidelines, but clearly if you're making a steak, you're probably not picking a Riesling. So I'm just curious how you approach it.
I probably do it backwards from most people. I say, what do I want to drink tonight? And then I'll create the dish around that. And very similar to going to a restaurant, I'll say, I'm just craving a Riesling or champagne or something like that. And so we'll bring a bottle, I always bring a bottle, buy a bottle. But it's always based around what I want to drink. And I mean, my wife and I don't drink Monday through Thursday, but the weekends are when we're cooking and hanging out at the house and have the kids and other people over. And we just discuss what we want to have that night, and then we build the menu around that.
And are there things you're looking for? Like, let's say you're going to have, you said you do white Burgundy, so you're going to have a Chardonnay, you're going to have acidity and texture. How do you then translate that into what you're going to make?
That's a great question. And it can be that we know we want something bigger food-wise, but we want the white first. So maybe you open it at 3:30 or 4 and have that bottle first and then move to red with the food. But I don't really view there as there being any written rules. I mean, if you're really craving a Cabernet and you're having sushi, you're going to figure out a way to make it work. And vice versa on the flip side. I mean, you can pair lighter wines with heavier foods, but make sure to have that acid that can cut through the fat and the savoriness. And so I don't think there's any rules.
So for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure or privilege to taste Fulldraw wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Oh man, I think you're missing out on everything. Really what we love to show is, while we can make big wines, we like to show a little bit of restraint on what we're doing. And so we would like to focus on the finesse. You've got the acid backbone from our limestone soils. You've got the color and the density from the way that we're farming the fruit and then bringing it into the winery and making. And you even have wines that are a bit bigger and structured with a little more new French oak. And we really like to focus on the texture and the mouthfeel. And so when you taste the wines, especially the Syrahs, it's going to almost be like you have velvet on your tongue and it just glides through your mouth. But then you've got this beautiful acid finish that helps carry out the flavor structure. And I don't know. I love our wines, but obviously I'm biased.
I hope you love your wines.
Yes, absolutely.
So if space aliens were to land in your property and knock on your door, which of your wines, you make 9 different wines, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with and say, this is Fulldraw?
While I would love to say Grenache, we do make only one wine that's 100% varietal specific. That's Grenache. It's called Hard Point. I think our most user-friendly, widely appreciated wine is called Chopping Block, and it's usually a blend of Syrah, Mourvèdre, and Grenache. And so you've got great fruit profile in there still because you've got the Mourvèdre and the Grenache, but then you've got the beautiful structure and the texture and the mouthfeel with the Syrah. And so it's very a widely accepted wine, and so hopefully I'd like to do that. But if you're really saying you get to choose one wine, it's Hard Point, and that would be our Grenache.
Well, I'm going to get to try both of them.
Yes,
so So you've had your property for 10 years now, 10, 11 years. And was it planted already, or did you plant it?
There were 30 acres planted when I purchased the property. Let it go through one harvest and immediately ripped out 15 acres after. When we ripped out those 15 acres, it was predominantly Cabernet, wrong row direction, wrong spacing, Eutypa. There was a number of issues. Also not what I was looking to focus on. I wanted to focus on Rhône varieties. So when we ripped that portion of the vineyard out, we replanted in organic cover crop, let it lay fallow for 3 years before replanting, because I wanted to get the soil back to a semi-organic state before putting vines in the ground. So we really focused on that first. But during that time, we planted 15 acres in 2013 and then again in 2015. So we're up to 45 acres now.
Okay. So you you own the vineyard, you've spent time, I mean, it's your baby because you replanted and everything. So I'm curious, in the time you've been here, and even going back to prior to having this, we know every vintage tells a different story, but do you find more commonality year to year, or do you see big variation?
We don't see big variation. It was actually fun. So every year, if you're a wine club member, which we call automatic allocation, we throw a party in the spring. And it's a member appreciation party, and it's something that we get to have fun with. We bring in bands and do amazing food. But what we did last year was we opened up a vertical of every vintage of our Syrah-based wine called Honey Bunny. Here, I said I didn't think that there was a big variation, but each vintage, I could tell based on my memory of the growing season that there was differences. Now, what we do is we try to farm the same every year. The vintage is definitely going to tell the story. Syrah, we farm down to 2 to 2.5 tons an acre. Grenache, we take down to 3 tons an acre. So we're very involved with the crop load that we're carrying, because we know that that's going to translate into what we want in the cellar and make it easier on ourselves. So while I want to say that the vintage to vintage doesn't play a big impact, there are definitely nuances and differences in each vintage.
And you're adapting to that. So are there any signs or predictors that you look for that are going to tell you what a vintage is going to be?
Well, I can definitely tell you right now that it's been June gloom for 6 weeks, and I'm ready to see the sun.
I like how June gloom for 6 weeks and June isn't 6 weeks long.
Yeah, I know, and it's crazy. And I understand that people in Southern California actually see this weather every year. In Paso, it's not that. It's normally bright sunshine. At this time, we should be seeing 80, 85 degrees, just beautiful weather. And it was misting and raining this morning, which I don't know if I've seen. I'm sure I have in June, but not off memory. Yeah. But it's going to be an interesting year to see when the sun comes out and how the growing season develops. My first vintage in Paso was 2011, and it is definitely reminding me there are differences but similarities in these two vintages, at least in the growing season up until this point. Now, only time will tell once the clouds clear and see what sunshine we have. And we pray for sunshine, but not too much like last year where it was 115 for 10 straight days. So we can take a pause on that.
So there are no sort of predictors, but there are things that you see that you're like, oh, too much heat or need more heat.
Yeah, I mean, the only predictor really that we have is 40 inches of rain versus no rain. So that has only been a complete blessing for us, and not only us, the entire state of California. See, the reservoirs filled, and I finally looked at my wife the last storm we had, and I go, Uncle, I'm done. I'm over it. We've got all the rain we need, but I know that it's only a positive thing for everyone. Now, some people did see issues with their properties, and that's cleanup work, and we'll all get back to a normal growing season, but we needed that water bad.
And in a way, this gloom is good because it's letting the water really settle into the land. If it jumped to 115 degrees, you'd be burning it all out, right?
Exactly. So, I mean, getting into the growing season in a little bit cooler temperatures is not a worry for us. It's actually helped our vines really grow and develop nicely this spring versus just coming out of the gate hot, which I don't know anything different because I've only been here for 12 years, and that's what all 12 years have been. So
in those 12 years, I mean, you obviously spend time in your vineyards, and you were just talking about how your vines look now, but when you're walking through the vineyards, do you talk to your vines? What kind of communication do you have with them?
More of a spiritual connection than a verbal connection. That's actually not true. I curse at some vines. I hug some vines. We're blessed to have almost every exposure. So north, south, east, west. We have 6 different soil types on the vineyard. So really, we had to dig a lot of soil pits and really get an understanding of how each rootstock was going to pair with the soil, what varieties to plant. I got great guidance from mentors at the time, also some soil scientists, because we really wanted to know. We knew what we had, but we wanted to make sure that we were making the correct connection with the varieties in the rootstock, because we do view our vineyard as a life source, not only for us, but for the next person to take over. We're renting the land. Yeah, while we may be the owner, we're just the steward of the land for our time. And we want to make sure that we're setting up our vineyard to really be able to blossom for a long time. So we think about that consciously a lot and talk about it openly.
And sometimes you have to reprimand your vines.
Yes, we definitely do. Sometimes they don't act the way I want, and that might be the time I curse them, but it is what it is, and we've now come to an understanding with each other.
And then I know you're really into music. You were, top 5% of Spotify?
Yeah, I have music on all the time.
So do you play music to the wine, or is the music for you?
Depends on the time of the year. It's mostly for me, but in the fall, and I used to catch a little flack for this, not really. During harvest, you have what we call night shift, and so we do punch downs later in the evening, so between 9 and 10 o'clock. If you walk in on me unannounced, you might hear Glenn Miller Band radio. I mean, you'll hear big orchestra. I dig that. I love it. During the daytime, if it's harvest, lots of rock and roll. But outside of that, we are all over the map. EDM, country. I enjoy everything. I think each genre has a place.
And do you think the grapes enjoy those genres?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's why we find during harvest, the first couple weeks is Syrah based, and we're really trying to get in a good mood because you've got picking, processing, pressing. You have a lot of things happening, so there's a lot of rock and roll. So you get that feeling in Honey Bunny, which is our Syrah-based wine, because it's bigger, it's richer, it's got some muscle behind it. And then towards the end of the year, everybody's a little burned out, and we play a lot of country, and so it's a little more mellow. And you see that with the Grenache-based wines.
I love that. Well, we're gonna talk about wine and music in a little bit, but before then, I'm curious. Have you and your team established any sort of good luck rituals at the start of harvest to kind of mark the time?
No, by that time of the year, I'm so fully invested in being in the vineyard and being meticulous on the days that we're picking, the times that we're picking. We also have clients, so I'm out in the vineyard with the clients talking about their fruits. We sell fruit to, I think, 6 other wineries. And then it's a 24-hour notice. It's a let's go. You guys better be ready, because now for the next 6 weeks, it's a lot of work. But we also know that all of us have done a number of harvests. We view it as a fun time. We don't look at it as, oh God, we're going to work 100 hours this week. You high five and say, let's do this together.
Like, we're going to work 100 hours.
Yes, exactly. And so it's one of those things that it's a short time period, and that sets you up for the entire year. So no, we don't have any I guess the only pre-harvest ritual that we have is we probably do it too close to harvest, but we have a little bit of a party that goes a little too late at night, and we drink too many bottles. But we don't view it as a ritual. It's me getting everybody pumped up and say, all right, this is my saying thank you preemptively for what I'm going to do.
Kind of a ritual.
Yeah. It is kind of a ritual. It's meant to be a good ritual, but some people go, oh, it's happening.
So you fell in love with wine and started studying wine when you were younger. Was that always what you wanted to do? Or when you were a little boy, did you have other dreams of what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Definitely an athlete when I was younger. So I started swimming competitively, I think at the age of 6. Really loved soccer, golf. Swam competitively up until I was 14. And that's really when I started to fall in love with football. And football consumed my life for the next 6 years. So that's what I focused on. And I'd love to say that I was also a good student, but I was a student so I could play football.
Okay. And then wine was something that you pursued immediately.
I was still thinking about wine even while I was playing football at Iowa State. And my last 2 summers off of school was blessed enough to have a job at a small retail store out in Colorado. I have cousins that own ski and snowboard rental shops out in Colorado, so I was able to spend time with them. And originally it was so I could go fly fishing before and after work, but then Rhonda Black, my boss at the time, she owns a shop called the Catherine Store. She knew that I liked Chateauneuf du Pape and loved the wines coming out of that region. So one day she said, have you had Rhones from California? And I said, why would I have Rhones from California when I can have them from Rhône? Right. And she told me to quit being a Francophile and a snob and come taste some wines. So she opened up a handful of wines from the Paso region. I was just floored with the density, the texture, the aromatics, just everything about each of those wines. And I said, I have to see how it's made, which led me into the internship at Booker Vineyard in 2011.
Wow. See how it all goes from there.
Oh, yeah.
From football to wine.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a favorite football team?
Well, if we're talking college, Iowa State, because I played there, but really it's hard for me to watch football anymore because of the time of the year. It's harvest. And if I do have a Saturday or Sunday off, I'm definitely spending that time with my family, my kids, and doing something fun because they don't know that I'm getting my ass kicked at the winery. So I still have to put on that chipper face and play friend and dad and all that fun stuff.
That's how you spend your free time, is with the kids?
Yes, almost exclusively, yeah.
If Iowa State were to win a championship, which of your wines would you want to have them celebrate with?
They're definitely celebrating with Honey Bunny, the big bad wine. So that's the wine they're going to do. And if they get to a championship, you can guarantee it that I'll be there.
So you don't have a lot of free time because obviously running a winery is a big business and having 2 small children is very time consuming. And you and your wife work together. But when you're trying to create a romantic evening for just the two of you, not an average evening, what sort of wines set a romantic evening for you guys? Or are you just going to tell me every time you open wine, it's just that's what it is?
That's what it is. No, we're definitely opening up one of our favorite champagnes, one of our favorite Burgundies. And if it's that kind of romantic evening, probably 2 or 3 more bottles after that. But it'll go all over the spectrum, depending upon the time of the year, the location, the food, as we were discussing earlier. But it will always start with a great bottle of champagne, always.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned having some mentors, and we all have teachers and mentors and parents who give us advice along the way. Is there a piece of advice someone gave you at some point that you try to live or work by?
Oh, man. I'm going to have to think about that one for a minute. There's a lot of good and bad advice. Not bad. Good advice for the time, and then it translates into something different. That was a wrong choice of words. I apologize. I think Eric Jensen at one point just said, keep your head down, work your ass off, and if you know you're doing the right things, whether they're as long as you're making your decision, you're following your heart, the wines are going to come out great. And he also said, never choose to make a wine based on money. Make the wine that you want to make because that's going to translate in the bottle. And so I think that now thinking about it, that was one of the best pieces of advice I got.
Well, it kind of goes back to the critics and scores in a way. Like, you've got to make wine for yourself, not for... So, I mean, it is for someone else, but...
It's for the people coming. We make wine for the people that are coming to our winery to taste. And the great thing that my wife and I have done, I believe, is given every wine its own personality. So there's so many different flavor profiles and what people enjoy out there that we really wanted to say, okay, here, we're giving you a handful of red wines that you never really feel like you're going to cross over into one another. Because if you join our membership, you're getting 2 6-bottle shipments a year. And so we don't want to have anything overlap. We want you to enjoy each of the wines as their own versus saying, okay, well, I've got 5 Syrahs and here you go.
Right.
So I think that really coming here to the winery to experience that is the best way.
And you differentiate these wines each with their own unique labels.
Yes, the labels are definitely a fun way to do that. My wife and I started thinking about what we were doing for labels our first vintage, which was 2016. So we knew we had about 2 years of time in that window. And so for the first 12 months, we were saying, oh, well, we could do this. And we were in a small town in Colorado walking through, and there was an art gallery that had a painting of an airplane, which is now Honey Bunny. We went into the gallery, and I just said, this is going to be one of our labels. This is amazing. And the owner of the gallery and I start talking, and I finally said, okay, if I own the rights and I own the piece because it's an original, I get to put it on a label. He said, yeah, that's fine. And I said, all right, well, how much? And he goes, 35. I said, 3,500 is not bad. And he goes, 1,000. And I felt my heart drop to the floor. I go, we're in a different galaxy. I'm out of here. So I actually tracked down the artist who's from Huntington Beach. So if you've ever been in In-N-Out Burger, you see all the retro car on the walls. Michael Bryan was the original artist for In-N-Out, and he was actually the artist for that airplane. So I tracked him down. We had lunch together, and he said he needed to taste the wine before he would let me put any of his artwork on the bottle. And I said, why? Because I'm going to let you put one of my beautiful pieces of art on a piece of shit wine. I said, we're going to get along great. You're going to enjoy it. So he actually commissioned that piece for us, which is hung in the winery. So anybody that comes to the facility gets to see that. It's a longer story, but basically my grandfather on my mom's side of the family was in the Pacific Theater, and I started reading a lot about World War II in my early teen years, just because I was interested in that era and that time. So I started asking my grandfather questions, not necessarily about his time, because I know he wasn't going to talk about that, but what the general feeling was in the country, on the West Coast where he was stationed, in the world. And we just got into some good conversations, and one of those stories happened to include the Flying Tigers, which is the airplane that is on the bottle. Because when I saw that painting, it brought back all of those memories and emotions came flooding back, and I wanted to keep something personal to us, and each label that we have has some sort of a story like that behind it.
Ooh, it's beautiful. So you got to come here to learn all the stories. Exactly. So when you look back at your career so far, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
Oh my goodness. Building a beautiful family. That's first and foremost for me. I
Is it in your career? Because I know.
That is a career, right? I mean, you choose two different careers.
I know, but it's always fair. Children are always like the greatest accomplishment. Well, usually should be, but that's why I said in your career.
Yes. No, I know. Man, greatest accomplishment in my career
that you feel so far. It could be a big thing. It could be a very small thing.
I mean, just being able to step away. Both my wife and I in 2016 had full-time positions, and just to start Fulldraw, we knew it was going to take both of us. So taking that leap of faith and jumping off a cliff head first and going all in, both leaving our full-time positions to start Fulldraw, I think that was the biggest moment in our career, is just having the faith in ourselves to be able to started making wine at 600 cases and just praying that there was water off after you jumped off that cliff. So
well, I think it's quite an achievement, because you have a beautiful facility here. You've tripled your production and it's been 16 to 23. You got a good 9 years on you so far and going, or 7 years.
Well, I mean, we only have 5 vintages in bottles, so and the other 2 are in barrel. Yeah, so we're things started to snowball quickly after we released our wine, which we've been blessed and fortunate enough to be able to recognize and see that, and people have really liked the wine. So building the facility, having our own home, and taking another leap of faith in a short amount of time was something that we were excited to do.
I love it. So we're sitting at a big table here. Your bottles of wine are on the table, and there's an empty seat next to you. Who from any walk of life, living or deceased, would you wish you could share a bottle of Fulldraw wines with?
That's a good question. Wow. That's not hard. Winston Churchill.
Oh.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he has one of the greatest quotes. He has a ton of great quotes. But one of my favorite quotes of Winston Churchill is, magnum of wine is the perfect size for 2 people having lunch, especially if one is not drinking.
That's a great quote.
But again, going back to me being a historian buff and World War II, it's just hard for me to think of anybody else that I'd want to share a bottle with.
Good answer. So, complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
A Friday night by yourself? I don't know. Man, that's another good one. A table without wine is like a glass without water. I mean, they go hand in hand.
There you go. So, we were talking a little bit about all the rain we had in this last year, being in a drought for a number of years. You think we'll be making wine and drinking wine in 300 years' time?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, who would have thought that some of the greatest wines in the world would come out of California? I mean, it was less than 100 years ago that came to be. Mm-hmm. For a long time, people were wondering if wine could be made outside of France or Spain or that area. So I think that we will for sure be seeing wine in 300 years. And as long as we cannot have a short-term memory loss of the drought and everybody using more water than they need, then we'll be all right.
Well, if we weren't and you were being sent to a deserted island, I had to lead up to that one.
Yeah.
What 3 wines would you want to take with you?
I'd take Hard Point, which is our 100% Grenache. I would take, oh man.
They don't have to be your wines.
I know, that's what I'm thinking about. It would be, probably a Coche Dury Merceau Les Perriers from Burgundy. And then for Champagne, man, so many good. I guess it'd just have to be Salon. Just go straight for the top. It'd be Salon, any vintage, I'd be good.
I do love how, of all the wines we've talked about, that you said you love Burgundy, which you picked white Burgundy. You said you love Champagne, you picked one. And instead of picking a Chateauneuf de Pape, you picked your own.
Heck yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that our Grenache is great. I really do. Not comparing it to anybody else's, but that wine is one of the harder ones to really nail. Not because it's hard to make in the winery, but in the vineyard, you want to see, like, I want to see 3 to 3.25 tons an acre, and we get very meticulous about how to get there. Grenache vines want to give you 8 tons an acre. So what we have to do is immediately green harvest 50% of the fruit. Then we wait for the berries to swell up and start to go through veraison. And then I work meticulously with our crew on going through, looking at each individual cluster with your hand and seeing if it's the correct size. If it's not, you're taking off the tip, you're taking off the shoulders, something to help reduce the size, because we're looking at color concentration, flavor concentration, acid concentration. So when we taste the wine in bottle 3 years later, if it puts a smile on my face, it's because I remember all the hard work and all the meticulous attention to detail it took in the vineyard to get there.
I love it. Well, speaking of that, why don't you pair that wine with a song or a genre or music?
Man.
The Grenache, the
Hard Point. 2019 Hard Point. I'm going to have to pull up Spotify to think of the name of the song, but it's definitely going to be... Hard Point. That's going to be by the Turnpike Troubadours. It's called Bird Hunters, or Bird Hunter, and partially because of the label, having a German Shorthair Pointer on it. But that song always reminds me of my childhood, and that takes me back to Grenache and bird hunting with dogs and family and friends, and so it's a very happy memory for me. So definitely that song.
Okay. Let's jump over to your Grenache Blanc. Well, actually, your Drift, which is a blend of Claret Blanche with 20% Grenache Blanc.
That is going to be paired with... Oh, man. Sorry. Bear with me.
Gotta have a little cheat sheet there.
Yes. That's going to be Moonlight Serenade by Glenn Miller. Yeah, because that was also the first song at my wife's and my wedding, so also another memory there.
What about your Sun Shower, your Grenache Mourvèdre Syrah blend?
You're definitely wanting that by a pool, so you might need an EDM song. So Sweet But Psycho, the remix by Morgan Page.
And what about your Chopping Block, which is also a GSM, but a reverse of Syrah Mourvèdre Grenache?
Yeah, that's going to be... paired with a Greta Van Fleet song. Let's just call it Highway Tune.
Okay. And last but not least, the one you would give to your team if they won, the Honey Bunny. Which is Syrah with Mourvèdre.
That's going to need to be Burden in My Hand by Stone Temple Pilots.
Very good. Wow. No wonder you're ranked so high on Spotify.
Yeah, I do enjoy music.
Well, Connor, I have one more question for you, and we're almost finished. This is it. You've been so much fun to talk with. What wine region in the world is at the top of your bucket list to explore?
Ooh, that's a great question. Northern Rhône. I've done Chateauneuf, I've done Champagne, I've done Burgundy, but I have not done Côte-Rôtie, Saint-Joseph. So the Northern Rhône region, also because I want to go to Lyon and eat at the amazing restaurants there. But definitely Northern Rhône is the next one. My wife and I have been blessed to see a majority of the wine regions in the United States on the West Coast. like I said, majority of the regions in France. So yeah,
Northern
Northern Rhone's next.
And for our listeners coming up to Paso Robles, how can they find you and explore Fulldraw wines? Where can they find you? What can they find when they find you?
Yes. So on all of our labels, we do have, I believe, our website. I shouldn't say that without knowing. But reach out to us directly at info@fulldrawvineyard.com. Our phone number is 805-712-4412. We would love to host you for a tasting. You can find our wines in some restaurants in Paso Robles, which would be Le Petit Canaille, In Bloom, and Biel Brasserie. Outside of that, the best way to find us is coming here to the winery.
And when you come here, in the winery, you have these little lounges set up where people get tastings with like a dedicated server.
Yes, so we like to set up our tastings flight style. So you'll have all the wines poured out for you beforehand. So when you sit down, someone will be able to sit down with you, explain the stories behind the labels, talk about the wines, but also be there to have fun, maybe give new recommendations on wineries you haven't been to or restaurants you haven't been to, and just generally have a lot of fun.
And it's great. It's a modern, very cool, sustainable winery surrounded by the vineyard. So you can't really beat the view or the scene.
Nope.
And or the wine. So, Connor, thank you for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and I think it's time to go drink some wine.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.